Thank you, Daphne. So I'm very, very honored to be here today to talk to you. I had to admit I had a chuckle when Carl put up that picture of MIT in the 1980s because I was there. And I remember that. I was there 31 years ago to study mechanical engineering. And then I went off and did 6 startups, mostly in robotics. And now I'm back at the Martin Trust Center, where we help students learn how to build new ventures in the context of either a startup or a corporation. And I'm very excited to see some of our alumni team here today. I see Adam, I see Rachel, so you will hear from them later. So, very excited to be talking to you about corporate entrepreneurship, and I'm going to start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a fellow named Yogesh. Yogesh is the director of engineering for a big tech company. Yogesh has been there for 12 years, and he runs a small data team with about 20 people reporting to him. He's very, very good. People love him, but he's bored. 12 years is very long, and he's not feeling stretched anymore. In his team, there's a fellow named Abhishek. Abhishek is known as the idea generator. He deals with customer data every single day, and every day he comes up with yet another idea of how to make his company work even better with this data. But he could never find any time to work on any of that, so he's getting frustrated. One day, they read about something exciting in the company newsletter. Somebody at headquarters called the Innovation Lab was running an idea competition. Anyone, anywhere in the company can submit ideas, and if they win the regionals, they get to go to the finals and present their ideas to senior executives. So they were very excited, quickly got a team together, and they submitted an idea to use AI to make sales teams sell more products to targeted customers. So they started working nights and weekends to make this thing work, submitted it to the regionals, and they won. They went to finals, went to Idea Bootcamp, pitched to senior executives, and they won first prize. Now, a lot of people would have stopped there. They would have been happy with the recognition. Not this team. They were determined to push it all the way through, bring it live, and bring real business value to the company. But there's still this small problem of not having any time to work on the ideas. And so Yogesh went back to his boss, and between them, they worked out a deal where the team was able to spend 2 months of concentrated time developing a minimum viable product, a first prototype. They were then able to go and deploy. They deployed it for the first time in the sales team in Santa Barbara, and within weeks, they generated $40,000 of extra pipeline that was never there before. They subsequently took that same thing and deployed it to the entire division and generated $2.5 million of additional revenue that was never there before in the first year of use. Did I make this story up? No, it really did happen. The company is a top 10 SaaS company headquartered in Boston, and this picture was taken in September of this year when they ran the final demo day of Idea Bootcamp. I was fortunate to have been there to listen to some of the pitches. Yogesh and Abhishek's story is a classic example of what we call corporate entrepreneurship. It happens when teams get together and create new ventures that generate net new business value in the context of an existing company. Corporate entrepreneurship is happening not only in tech, but in diverse industries, including automotive, retail, and also even beer. The world is moving at a very, very rapid pace. Corporations are set up to be predictable and repeatable. They're great at flying in formation. That's not necessarily the best model to react to rapid change. Startups by nature are iterative and experimental. They are good at responding to change. Big companies need people like Yogesh and Abhishek to be able to work like startups in their companies, but without any enablement infrastructure, these people can find it very, very difficult to do that. So what are the pieces of the puzzle for this enablement infrastructure? First, we need to separate the creation of the new ventures from the core so that the corporate entrepreneurs have time and space to work in a concentrated manner on the new ventures and have the freedom to try new things and to fail fast without brand risk. Second, connectivity. While separation is important, being cut off completely from the mothership is not healthy. We still need to have a way for business needs to flow from the core to the new ventures and for new ventures to generate business value that flows back to the core. Last, an innovation process that is sometimes but not always organized by a small group of dedicated innovation leaders in an innovation group. The basic idea there is that this creates a way for a company to invest in a large number of new ventures, to place a lot of small bets. Each one of those ventures may or may not work, but in aggregate, every year a few of those ventures would make it all the way through the innovation pipeline and have the potential of becoming future growth engines. Now, how do these innovation groups get created? What's in the innovation process? And how does this help people like Abhishek and Yogesh? This is where disciplined corporate entrepreneurship comes in. There are 3 pillars to this: strategy, enablement, and practice. First, strategy. I'd like to invite you all to join me in a thought experiment and imagine we work for a big beer giant. We work for a beer company and we make traditional beers. We are senior executives reporting to the CEO. Our company has a huge problem. In one of the biggest countries that we operate in, there is a big consumer behavior shift, and the young people are not drinking our beers anymore. In fact, they're shifting over to drink craft beer, spirits, wines, and spiked seltzer, anything except our beers. Our revenue looks fine now, but the trend does not look good. We have to do something about it. In light of this, our CEO calls us all into an offsite where we look at all the data that we have and figure out what can we do about this. Do we think we can solve this within the core business? We don't think so. Do we think we can solve this using M&A? Can we buy companies to solve this problem? Maybe. We weren't looking for companies to buy, but we just haven't really found anything that solves our problem. We finally came to the conclusion that we have to invest in our own people's ability to build these new ventures from within. We came away from the offsite having made some decisions. We decided to allocate a significant budget for a period of 3 to 5 years and invest in creating a new innovation group that would put out tools and programs that enable people like Yogesh and Abhishek to create new ventures. A few weeks go by, and we get back together for a follow-up meeting to make this thing happen. And the first thing that comes to mind is, where are we going to put this innovation group? Where should this report? The CEO is quite fond of having this report straight to him because he thinks that it's going to cut down on a lot of the bureaucracy and save time. While he's definitely right about that, there is one small problem. The CEO is very busy. In the beginning, the innovation group is going to need a lot of support from their executive sponsor, and it's very unlikely that they're going to get so much time from the CEO. We could have the innovation group report to the division where this share of throat problem came up in the first place, but the issue there is that the other divisions would find it a little bit more difficult to enjoy the services offered by this innovation group. After much thought, we decided to have this innovation group report to the Chief Strategy Officer, and we decide that for our company, that is the right thing. We have very, very good alignment between the timeline of things that the CSO office worries about and the innovation group is supposed to help with, and both of them are looking out for long-term growth opportunities. Let's shift our thought experiment to the next pillar, enablement. Now let's imagine we had just accepted a job as the very, very first director of innovation in this newly created group. It's our first day of work. We sit down with our boss, the Chief Strategy Officer, and we begin talking about what are we going to do in this first year. Our CSO has a friend who runs an innovation group in another company. This friend has put together a portfolio of tools, including university partnership, external startup accelerator, and a corporate venture capital practice. Our CSO says, well, it works for them. It should work for us too. Why don't we just start there, do the same 3 things, and build up from there? Would that be the right thing to do? Well, it kind of depends. It very much depends on whether or not we are seeing the same kinds of problems and challenges as this other company. As the incoming director of innovation, rather than jump straight into implementation, the better thing for us to do is to take a few weeks and talk to people. Spend a few weeks, talk to people at every level in the company, in every division of the company, and with that process, build up a lot of data about exactly what is going on in innovation and entrepreneurship in our company. And that lets us have a very clear view of what is the problem that is stopping our companies from being as entrepreneurial as it can be. A lot of times when we do this work, the problems fall into a few categories. It might be employee knowledge, it might be budget, it might be organizational structure and processes. Having that in mind helps us have context when we look at all of the different things that people are doing in the field. And people are doing all sorts of creative things, from hackathons to design thinking co-creation studios, incubators, accelerators, corporate venture capital, university partnership, $1 million contests outside. That's a Verizon 5G special. So all sorts of things are happening in the field. That helps us go and find the right things for our company that solves our problem. For example, the friend of the CSO, their company might be facing a problem with external connectivity. Perhaps that company has become a little bit too insular, too inward-looking, and they're losing touch with external technology trends. In that case, they have chosen exactly the right things to do, because these 3 things are meant to bring the technology perspective back into the company. We might not be having the same problem. Perhaps our problem is that we have too much process, we have too rigid of a structure. Perhaps our employees are innately able to create new ventures, but they just find it difficult to do that. In that case, a constellation of tools and programs that draws the ideas everywhere from the company and identifies the potential corporate entrepreneurs, and then provide them with workshops, coaching, mentorship, feedback, support as they build these new ventures might be the right thing to do. We might start with an idea competition, much like that first story. We might get hundreds of ideas. Within that, we could pick 10 or 15 teams and put them through training. Now, the point of training is not to put someone in a boot camp for 2 days or 2 weeks and they suddenly become experienced entrepreneurs. It's really to give them the framework and mindset so that they can really learn how it all works when they go and build their ventures. Then we could put them into a full-time 3-month-long accelerator. Now, you might say, wait a minute, a full-time accelerator. That means our corporate entrepreneurs have to take a sabbatical from work. 2 people, 3 months times 15, that's very expensive. How can we possibly afford that? Well, actually, that's kind of sort of the point, because if the problem that they're trying to solve is important enough, then the divisions would be only too happy to contribute that staff time, and it could be built-in validation that these entrepreneurs are solving problems that are really worth solving. At the end of the accelerator, we could organize a demo day where the entrepreneurs can pitch their ideas to senior executives for funding and for support. If they win that, they could form dedicated teams and continue to build these new ventures that might eventually generate a lot of net new revenue for the company. Let's shift our thought experiment one last time and go to the last pillar, practice. Imagine we are now the corporate entrepreneur. Imagine we are the director of marketing that works for the division where our share of throat problem came up in the first place. We had lived this problem in our own work. Every day, we struggle with making the growth targets, so we feel the problem deeply. We understand our consumers and our market, and we think there is a way out of this, but not by pushing more of the traditional beers. We think there's an angle where we can create a suite of new spirit-based drinks that could expand the product portfolio and put us back on a path for growth. Now, we were a marketing leader before. We've never built a venture from the ground up. What skills do we bring to the table, and what new skills do we need to learn? Of course, we need to learn entrepreneurial skills. Fortunately, there's a number of different kinds of frameworks that can help us do that. Design thinking, lean startup, or in MIT's case, we teach something called disciplined entrepreneurship. However, the entrepreneurial spirit and skill set is actually takes a little bit more time to get used to. We used to be a functional leader, and we used to look at only a facet of the problem in an established business. That's a very kind of partial worldview in terms of the whole business. We're now developing a brand new venture, and there are no rules, no boundaries, and we need to stop thinking like an employee and start thinking like a business owner. But above and beyond all that, we have to know that it is okay not to know everything. It is okay to be wrong. It is okay to fail. In fact, we have to redefine success and failure so that success does not mean going out to test a hypothesis and being proven right, but instead, success means being able to test as many hypotheses as possible in the least amount of time. Success means ability to take the data and change what we're doing and be very agile. Just entrepreneurial spirit and skills is not enough. We also need very, very strong organizational skills, starting with alignment. We have to really, really understand why is our company in business. What is our strategy? What is our first-year plan? What is our 5-year plan? Understanding that at a very deep level helps us take our new venture and align what we're doing with what our company needs us to do. We need great organizational navigation skills. Basically, this is like map reading for org charts. We need to understand who is in power and why. We need to have great networking skills so that we can find a way to meet them, talk to them, and understand what they really care about. We need to connect with them and map out their interests, what really matters in their own daily life, and are they supporting our venture right now, or are they opposing it? And if they're opposing it, why are they opposing it? Having all of that data helps us take what we're doing and align our interests with their interests so that when we win, they win too. There are 2 more things I want to talk about: metrics and governance. The second worst thing to be told as a corporate entrepreneur is to be given an unreasonable forecast for the first year. Go and generate $15 million of revenue in the first year when you start with nothing, no product, no revenue, and you're going to make $15 million. That's pretty bad, but only second worst. The worst thing to be told is to have no metrics. Just go play. Go and delight us. We don't know how to measure you. Just go and do your thing. That's terrible, because what you can measure, you can improve. Conversely, if we do not have any metrics, how do we know that we're making progress? And how does anybody know we're making progress? So whenever something goes wrong, guess who's first in line to get cut? Not good. As a corporate entrepreneur, it's our responsibility to come up with the right kinds of metrics so that we're measured by the right kinds of ideas. There are 2 kinds of metrics that are relevant for an early-stage venture: traction metrics and revenue metrics. The core business will always gravitate to financial metrics because that's how they are used to measuring things. Revenue, growth. The problem with a new venture is it could take years before those numbers become significant. In the meanwhile, there are a lot of things we can measure that can help us understand, are we on track or are we not on track? Metrics like how many customers have we talked to in order to understand their needs and wants, when we have product to test, how many customers have we tested with? How many versions of the product have we tested with customers? Are we able to adapt what are we doing with the market feedback? Once we have something to sell, how many customers are converting to paid customers? And are they coming back? Are they referring their friends to come see us? What is their satisfaction level? What is our Net Promoter Score? All of these are leading indicators that can give us a very early window onto whether or not we're doing well before the revenue metrics make any sense. Now, having metrics is good, but we need some kind of framework, some kind of structure to keep count. And that's where internal teams could borrow a page from startup entrepreneurs and think about putting together an internal board. The basic idea is that this is a board that's drawing leaders from different parts of the companies. It's a diverse group of people who's able to give us feedback and data from a number of different perspectives in the company. We, of course, as the entrepreneur, would be on the board, and whoever funds our venture in the beginning, for example, the chief strategy officer would definitely be on the board. If there is a head of innovation, that person definitely should be on the board because they would be our biggest champion. Now, who else would make sense to put on this board? Somebody who's going to benefit when we succeed, that would be a great person to put on the board. For example, if we are going to sell in a particular market, it would be great to have somebody from that division to be on the board. Conversely, if we need the help of somebody in another division, for example, we're really making this spirit-based product, and we need to use the excess capacity of a bottling facility in Brazil that takes down our capital expenses, right? That would be a good person to put on the board. The basic idea is that all of the important stakeholders are there so that we have a way of getting their feedback and also checking our homework. And they also feel like they have a voice in how we make key decisions. Now, the whole story was actually inspired by Anheuser-Busch InBev, which is behind all of these beers. Budweiser is hiding behind that because nobody really wants to drink Budweiser. So they just like every other big beer company was facing a share of throat problem in the early mid-2000s, and they continue to face that problem. So in 2015, leadership in the company decided to start a new division called ZX Ventures, headquartered in New York. And this group had, in the past 3 or 4 years, put out a number of different tools and programs to stimulate entrepreneurship and innovation, including an incubator, an external corporate venture capital practice, an idea competition, a training boot camp, a 3-month-long full-time summer accelerator, and a way for executives to fund promising ventures that they see on the demo day of the accelerators. And their efforts have started to bear fruit. Here are some examples of things that has come out of this process. This is called Beer Box, and it is a beer vending machine for festivals. Canvas is a fiber and protein shake that is made from spent grain, which is a byproduct of making beer. The most radically non-beer product is a beer delivering service in Brazil. As you can see, this process can help a very, very traditional company create products that are radically different from what they're doing in the core. And it's really starting to work for them. According to CNBC, in July, they had made $1 billion. That's okay. So, out of $54 billion, it's still pretty good, $1 billion in 4 years. This is a lot of information in a short time. If there is one idea I would like for you to take away from this talk, it is this. Corporate entrepreneurship does not have to be an oxymoron. It is real, people are doing it, and companies are successful doing it. What's more, every one of us has the ability to help our companies do this as well. The first step we have to take is suspend disbelief and embrace our capabilities and responsibilities to help our own companies become more entrepreneurial. Next week, when you go back to work, I would like to give you a challenge. Think of one problem that you think is standing in the way between where your company is today and how entrepreneurial you know it can be. Think of that problem, and then think of one thing you personally can do in the next hour that can perhaps begin to change the conversation. It could be just sending an email. It could be having a conversation in the hallway with someone. One thing you personally can do, and then go do it. And keep doing it over and over. And before you know it, you yourself would have become one of the change agents that has helped your company become more entrepreneurial. Have fun, good luck, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine. So now we're going to move on to the question.
Yeah, the questions were there and they are not there.
So the people up there, they're going to start to project the questions, and basically you can read them, reread them for the group, and just answer them when you're ready. This should be a smooth process.
This should be, technology works when it
And then we start with the first one with the 13 votes. That's going to be...
Okay, we're going down in number of votes, right? So
we should.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Is there any way to hi, would it be possible to show that here as well? Okay to say no. All right. Generating ideas that create new value is a big part of innovation. Taking them to market successfully is a different story. Best practices. So I take this to say, well, there's a lot of motion and not real action, right? A lot of idea competitions, and then they just stop halfway through. I think that is what the idea of a pipeline has to come in, because a lot of times the innovation groups have got their own metrics, and they're all process metrics in terms of how many ideas they got, how many people they trained. There has to be another kind of metric, which is how many ventures actually resulted from all that activity. And I think that basically means that we want to take a number of tools and string them in a series. And it doesn't always have to be idea competition to accelerator to funding. That's a way, but you have to kind of find a way for the ideas that are promising to continue to go and be developed. And, well, accelerate is one way. You could potentially put it into skunkworks, and then when the ideas are promising, you can have the option of spinning it out, spinning it back in, or licensing it. But you have to also count the outcome of those innovation activities. Does that make sense? All right. How do you best build up the needed competence in the base organization to receive and get the actual value? Competence gap. So maybe that's a good excuse to talk about Fidelity. So Fidelity is a financial capital company in Boston, privately owned by the Johnson family, and they have a very, very strong commitment to innovation. In fact, they are one of the first organizations in the Boston area to put up an innovation lab. They embraced the design thinking framework. By the way, I'm very framework agnostic. I don't care what is the framework, but frameworks really help guide the conversation. Anyway, so they decided to go and latch on to design thinking framework, and they started doing training and co-creation exercises and started cycling pretty much the whole staff through. So I am friends with somebody named Susie Hamill who runs design thinking training and co-creation studios, and she said that in the time that she was there, she had probably trained 50,000 employees. And the question is, if you put someone into like a day or half-day boot camp, what happens afterwards? Does it change anything? With design thinking, we've seen that the way you know is changing something is you perk up at the coffee machine and watering holes and see what are people talking about. And they know they had started to change the conversation when people started to talk about customer and customer empathy and things like that in casual settings. So in that particular case, it was kind of more a mindset shift and also embracing the importance of customers. Okay, large corporations tend to be hiring people who can conform to deliver core business. How do you find the entrepreneurs in the companies? So this is a fun one, right? So some people think that the entrepreneurs are born and you can't really change someone. Well, we are at MIT. Of course, we don't believe that. We believe anyone can learn to be entrepreneurial. Now, the interesting thing is not everybody wants to do that because it only makes some people happy to do entrepreneurial things. So the way to find these people is to look for what we call kind of the wild ducks. These are people who are good at their job, but they are a little bit strange. They don't really fit. They're a little bit bored. So a lot of times the Yogesh story and the Abhishek story is very, very classic. Actually, I met a different person at that company called Arif. They had an idea competition, and this one person in 1 weekend generated 75 ideas. He's actively harmful. So, he's just terribly bored, and he's just full of ideas. So I think that you want to kind of create some events and, opportunities for these people to actually show up, and the idea competition is one way. Now, there is one caveat with idea competition, which is sometimes after you run it 3 or 5 years, you find that it's always the same people. So you keep seeing Abhishek and you keep seeing Arif, and you don't see anyone else. So that's also something we have to recognize is not everybody necessarily is driven to entrepreneurial kinds of ways of working, and we have to respect that as well. Finding solutions is exciting and simple. Is it simple? Wow. Okay. Sometimes not so simple. Rollout phase is another story. So I think that's kind of really is a parallel to startup work, right? So getting things to work once is easy. Getting things to work 1 million times the same way is hard. Rolling it out, what are the obstacles? Well, if the innovation is done in a separated group that's completely not connected to the core business, that is a problem because when they get to a certain point, there's nowhere to hand this off. So I think if the rollout is hampered by a loss of ability to continue to invest, then looking at what resources the company needs to provide so that you can continue to fund these ventures could be a thing. Now, we've been studying innovation groups in the past few years. It seems like there's a lot of new groups that were formed in the last 5 years. So a lot of the groups in all sorts of different companies we've talked to are now only beginning to see that they have fixed the front end, but the pull-through and having ventures come out the other end isn't there yet. So a lot of companies are just kind of coming up with new programs that is meeting all the ventures where they are. CX Ventures just happens to be a little bit further ahead than everybody because they've had 4 years. The companies that have been around for 2 years, they're just now realizing they need to have a funding mechanism and also other kinds of support mechanism to keep building these. So I think you would need to put in new enablement programming for that. Disciplined entrepreneurship. I can go on that for days. Okay, so disciplined entrepreneurship is a framework where we talk about what it really takes to build a new venture. So design thinking is a very product-centric worldview. So if you look at the classic picture of design thinking from the Stanford D School, for example, it starts with customer and it ends with product. But it assumes that you have decided this thing is worth doing. Lean startup is about build, measure, learn, about reducing waste, about making a minimum viable product and testing it quickly in the market. It also assumes that you already have some idea, where are you going? This disciplined entrepreneurship basically starts one step before that, and there are 6 themes and 24 steps. The first theme is called Who is Your Customer, and it starts with market segmentation. It really, really wants everybody to start with the problem area that you want to solve, segment the market, pick one place to start, and then really, really build that understanding of the customers. After that, then you can go and talk about what can we do for the customer, and that's where we look for solutions that are different and better. And then we have 4 more phases that has to do with the making of the money, the very, very prescriptive step-by-step guide to thinking through unit economics, the financials of the company, and how are you going to have a path to greatness via a product roadmap, because we want everyone to start somewhere, land and expand. So discipline entrepreneurship is much more broad in terms of all of the things that an early startup needs to do, and it's helpful, especially for someone like me with a technical background who may have had less experience with sales process to have that whole thing laid out. How to sustain new ventures within the company when the fully loaded cost of a resource is structurally going to be 3x more expensive than in a startup? Well, it is and it isn't. So, okay, so in a startup, you pay people peanuts. Well, okay. Yes, your base is higher, but from the employee's perspective, you're paying them less. Why? You cannot give them equity upside. So that's actually, I think that, there's the budget on the hiring manager side, but then from the employee side, it's actually difficult to motivate them to go and do a new venture in a big company. So you think that you're paying them too much overhead, too much stuff. They think that you're not giving me the upside with equity so that I could potentially kind of, become like a multi-billionaire from my stake. So I think, I was going to just circle back. I think that you have to kind of think about headcount a different way, because headcount is only a part of the investment, and it's always going to be the people that you can bring on board. And yes, you have a lot of overhead, but that's kind of part of the draw for some people who may not be able to take the level of risk and the level of compensation in cash that a startup can offer. So that actually could be an asset. So it kind of goes for and against you, right? How to deal with the constraint that a company will not create a new business unit below 100 million of revenue when being profitable is not enough. Okay, so well then the question is there some incubation thing where you can live until you get to 100 million? Because I think that if you're a startup and you're going to raise venture capital money, your 5-year revenue has to be in the $100 million range, but it's 5 years. Is there a home for that? So for example, this e-commerce thing was incubated in the ZX Ventures incubator, and I don't know even now that they're kind of spun out as a different business unit. I would love to hear from Michelin's example. I think that why don't we hold that because Eric is going to have have a perspective on that, how Michelin actually dealt with that. All right, quick fire solutions come from those who think differently. For enterprise value targeting areas that generate value quickly. I don't really understand this question. Let me try again. Okay. May I ask whoever asked that question to please clarify? Huh? Oh. No one will own up to having asked that question. Okay, so okay, so is it about talent? So if it's about like inside of, so I'll answer a question I do want to answer, which may not be the question asked, and I have 2 minutes. So when you do these new ventures, should you have internal people do it or should you have external people do it? And depending on the company, some of them like it this way, some of them like it that way. Without fail, it's better to have some internal people and some external people. The external people bring a new perspective, so they're not totally kind of in line with how the company does things, but you also need a couple of people who are from the core so that you know how to get things done inside the company. So it's very important. So if you get a whole bunch of startup people together and try to get them to do an internal venture, you won't even be able to figure out how to procure a product, right? So you do need a balance, and depending on the company, I've heard a balance between internal and external of 50-50 to 80-20, 80 being external. Generally, you would not want to be more than 50% internal if you're really kind of trying to chase and kind of a very, radically different thing. All right, so I have maybe one more question. Brick and mortar companies. It's one thing to develop a new IT solution, another for a new line of products. I come from robotics, right? So it's not even brick and mortar. We're like sheet metal in factories. So how do you kind of develop those things that have a longer timeline? I think the same way you would develop a startup that is a robotics industrial startup, anything that's got a longer timeline, you plan for it. You know the sales cycle is long, so you have to fund it for longer. You know that developing product is long, so you have to budget for that, so you plan for it. I think I'm out of time. Thank you.